Hi guys, this is Mrs. Heisenbuttle, and today we're going to be starting our disease tracker app, which is 2.4. So I'm over here in courses and the directions, and the first thing I do is I download the disease tracker AIA file. And we're going to talk about this other stuff that's in here in a second. But primarily the idea here is that the CDC needs to collect data on flu patients, and they need to know how many flu patients came into a clinic in any given month. So we need to basically build an app that will do this. So the app needs to allow the user to enter the number of patients who have the flu for each month of the year. It has to store that information. It's got to calculate a sum, which is a total, right, of flu patients entered, and then it's got to display an average of those flu patients per month that you chose. And then you need to do a display of the list of all the entries so that you can see what's in your list. And you need to allow the user to clear all their data. So what we're looking at is something that looks like this. So there's an add button here, which is going to add up all of our stuff. There's a show data button, which needs to show us a bunch of stuff, and a clear data button that needs to clear everything. So before we can figure out what everything's supposed to do, we need to fill out our event handler chart because we need to understand what everything is supposed to do. So the first thing that has to happen is when the add button is clicked, we are going to need to basically calculate a sum. So calculate global, because I'm going to use a variable, so that way I can change it more easily. Calculate global sum, add all amounts in list. Makes sense? So all the amounts that are in that list are now going to get added up and figure out a global sum. Now, can I just calculate it? You're right, you can't just calculate, you also have to show it to yourself somewhere, right? So that gets me to, let me wrap this, there we go, so it makes more sense. So that gets us to the next piece, which means we have to show sum, global sum in a label. So when we hit the add button, we want it to not only figure out the sum, but to show it to us, right? Now, actually, I take that back. I don't want to show it to me, because notice I have a spot for that. It's called the show data button. So I need that to be down there. Show global sum in a label. So I can get rid of it here because I just want to calculate the global sum. Now, what was the other thing I had to calculate? That's right, I have to calculate an average. And I know that because I can go back to here that says I have to calculate an average number. So I need to calculate a global sum, add all the amounts to the list, calculate a global average, which would be sum divided by number of items in the list. And the reason I'm wording it that way is because I need to know how many items are in the list, because if they've only done 2 entries, and it doesn't make any sense to divide by 12. I know there's 12 months in a year, but if I divide by 12, then I'm getting an average per month over the whole year, when in reality they only gave me 2 months. So I want the average for those 2 months, right? So show global sum in a label. I also need to show global average in a label. There we go. So we're showing the global sum and the global average both in the label when we hit show data. The other thing we had to do was we have to display the list of all the entries for the user to view. So I'm going to have a display data list as well. Show display data list in list viewer. Now, you're going to say, how do you know you have a list viewer? Because I looked ahead and I saw this guy right here, data list view. It's a list viewer. So, we're not sure what that does yet, but we know it's a list viewer. So, what do I have to do when I hit the clear button? So, I'm going to need to set global sum to 0. Oops, 0. And I always forget. I also need to set global average to 0. Now, just because I set them to 0 doesn't necessarily mean that I have cleared that label where it lives, right? So I also have to set those. So that means I have to set some label to something, an empty set of some kind, an empty text bubble or something. And I have to set global average also to an empty set. And I'm going to need to set display data list to empty list. Now I can't set a list back to be like a number 0. So I have to set it back to being an empty list. So now that I know what everything is supposed to do, it gets a lot easier to actually do the code. Okay, so now that I've got my event handler chart over here all ready to go, now I can scroll down and start looking at what to actually do. So it goes down, it starts talking about the view layer, and it's talking about the month spinner, and we haven't seen a spinner before, so they want you to go ahead and test the spinner to see what it does. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about lists and how to put our lists together. So let's go take a look over here. And we're going to start up our emulator. Okay, so here's my emulator, and here's what it looks like when I do a month spinner. So notice it just brings up an interior list that I can go ahead and click on. And if I look over here where it says add items, that's my month spinner. All those items are already added here in the elements from the string. So I already have that. I don't have to do anything with it. So right now we're just going to go over here to our blocks and see what they gave us. They initialized a global sum to 0, a global average to 0, and they set up a clear data button, which obviously I'm going to have to add some stuff to. So come back over here, close that, and first thing we're going to do is we need to create an entry months list. So we're going to go here, and then we're going to create an entry amounts list, and we're going to go from there. So in order to be able to do this, I have to initialize an empty list. So, and it was called global months list. And since it's a list, I'm actually leaving list in the name of the variable. It keeps me honest, and so I remember that it's a list. There, under lists, is create my empty list. So that's my months list. So, yep, entry months, they called it entry months, so I suppose I should go back here and say entry months list. And the reason I like to leave list again is because that way I know it's a list and I don't get confused later. So I need another one of those for the entry amounts list. And again, I'm going to create an empty list. So now I have 2 empty lists, and now I'm going to go back to my directions, And the first thing it does, it explains what those are doing, and now it says what happens when you hit the add button. Well, I want it to put things into entry months and entry amounts, and it gives me a little set of how to do that. So you've got an add items to the list block, and we're going to add whatever's the monthly spinner, month spinner selection to the global months list. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the amounts. I'm going to go to the text box and make it a blank bubble. And I'm going to go to the notifier and say data successfully added. So I'm going to come back over here and very quickly, I need lists, add items to list. Over here, it's all going to be under my, where'd it go? Add button, because that's where I'm doing everything. So I'm going to put it in my add button. And the first thing I need to do is add items to my list. The name of the list is the global entry months. And I want to add my spinner selection. So if I go to my spinner, there it is, month spinner selection. So I've added it. Now I want to do the same thing here, but this time I want to add it to the amounts. And I don't want to have anything to do with the spinner this time. I want my user is going to click in this amount text box and type something. So I need to go get the text that they typed and add that. So back to the directions now. Amount text box needs to go back to being empty. That's so that the user can then type and add something again. So I'm going to go back over here, and the text box was right there. Amount text. This time I'm going to set it. There, now you can see better. And I'm going to set it to an empty string. And now I have to do something with a notifier. So I'm going to scroll down. Notifiers are non-visible components, so they're funky components at the very least. So they always show up at the bottom of your list. And I want show alert notice, I think. Yep, show alert notice, data successfully added. Now, the reality is you could have it say anything you wanted, but we're going to stick with the directions at least fairly closely. And I can say data has been added to list. And the reason I'm doing that is because that's actually what it's doing, is it's notifying me the data has been added to my list. So if I come over here and I select August and I put in 10 and add, there it is, data has been added to the list. And now I should be able to put in September and 20, add, data has been added to list. So we're good. So now we're on to the next part. So now we need a show data button. So the first thing we have to do is we have to calculate the sum, the average, and the data list. So those are 3 procedures that we are going to create. So we just come over here and we start our procedures. 1, 2, and 3. So again, this is where I'm going to stop, because at this point you guys can go on from here. You're just following step by step with the directions, test it after you do everything. And it says, okay, now put this in here, but we haven't told those procedures what to do yet. That's this part here. Creating the display sum. Don't skip over the flowcharts. They're super important and they explain to you how to figure out a sum and an average and everything else. So good luck, and we'll see you guys later.